Hello, everyone. My name is Sophia Hall, and I'm today's moderator for this Meet a Poet session. I'm a poet myself from Washington, D.C., where I served as Youth Poet Laureate in 2023. I'm a student at the University of Pennsylvania, where I study English and creative writing. And in fact, the poet I'm about to introduce today is one of my mentors and guides in poetry, Lynne Knight. Lynne Knight is the author of 6 full-length poetry collections and 6 chapbooks. Her work has appeared in many journals, and her awards and honors include publication in Best American Poetry, a PSA Lucille Medwick Memorial Award, a RATTLE Poetry Prize, and a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Thank you, Lynne, for your time and presence today. After Lynne's reading, we'll have a brief Q&A session with the poet herself. Now I'm going to turn it over to Lynne.
Thank you, Sophia, for such a wonderful invitation to do this. I'm going to read some poems that have to do with subjects that obsess me. And there are probably a handful of them that I keep returning to. One of them is The Silence of Women. And I first became really obsessed with this when I was teaching an art history course in conjunction with the English that I was doing. And we were studying Da Vinci and a portrait of Ginevra de' Benci, who was an Italian noblewoman of great beauty and talent. Her portrait is the only Da Vinci in the United States. And I was struck by the fact that she was well educated and a poet, yet only one line of her poetry survived. And that survived because she wrote it in a letter to a friend. And that line is, "I ask your forgiveness, and I am a mountain tiger." Oh my God, when I read that, I was just so angry that her poetry had disappeared. So I use her as a kind of emblem of the silence of women. And that's the first poem. The Silence of Women. Finally, the silence of women began to disappear. It crumbled like old bread. It evaporated like steam from broccoli. It rose like the scent of turmeric from kitchens. It mixed in with birdsong. It flew over rivers and oceans. It settled in prairies. It poured out like water trapped in leaves. The silence was one language. All the women on earth spoke it. They had mastered the tongue. But it vanished in the sound of vacuum cleaners. It lifted like smoke from chimneys. In winter, it covered the snow. It was white then, so at first, no one noticed. More snow, they thought, longing for spring. When spring came, the silence burst into cherry blossoms, plum blossoms, apple. This world of ours, the women cried, and their stories rushed out like breath held almost too long. It happens that today is, I just found out before logging on to this, Sylvia Plath's birthday. And the poet Heather McHugh said in an interview that I read several years ago that all the women of Heather's generation wanted to be Sylvia Plath, and I include myself among them. And during an interview that I heard with Sylvia Plath, she said that a poet can include anything in her poems, even a toothbrush. I haven't yet written about a toothbrush, but I have written about something as mundane. This is a poem called Hairpins. Whatever you do, don't include hairpins. an ancient Chinese poet loosely translated, advised. Moons will do, or a lone frog in a pond, but hairpins introduce the mundane in its least appealing aspect, worse than a woman who's let herself go or neglected to do her hair. Just toss the pins and combs and lacquers aside like a bead curtain, no longer needed to hide the rest of the room or lure someone into it. Today, cleaning the downstairs bathroom, something else the wise would no doubt leave out of poetry, I spilled an old cold cream jar filled with hairpins I hadn't known were there, and I saw her stride out, her hair streaming behind her like a fury's, her mouth composed against him, so magnificent with wrath, he felt he was watching Blake etch one of his terrible angels. The truth excites less. She left without fury. She left behind things other than hairpins. He's kept undisturbed. Perfume, a scarf, some books. I'd prefer the fury, leaving as it does less room for love to continue. But giving hairpins such weight denies them their rightful place in poetry, where they should be allowed to lie hidden in jars, to lie scattered on floors, to lay claim to the heart. I love writing love poems that don't seem like love poems until you finish them. And I also love writing narrative poems that look as if, read as if they're autobiographical, but in fact are not. So this poem, which is called The Story, embodies both of those things. The only thing I need to tell you before I read it is that once one of my colleagues came to the faculty room and announced that she had planted anemones in her garden. I'm not a gardener, and I thought, I wonder what they are. And it didn't register with me until much later that she had planted anemones. And that stayed with me and ended up making its way into this poem. The story. We walk through the aquarium's blue light behind the father and child. He holds up to the tank like an offering, and he keeps saying it wrong. Anemones, look, anemones. The child whispering chorus, until I see in the anemones the face of my great-grandmother Anna, whom I knew from tintypes found in a shoebox, soft and damp to the touch as flesh, found as a child in her daughter's attic, where my mother had warned me to stay with my dolls on the open patch of planked floor, away from the strange architecture of trunks and boxes. Shoebox wouldn't matter, I thought, pulling it free. And then the face I didn't know, grieved, though I didn't know grieving either. Not that year, but soon, I heard the story over and over, how her husband had teamed the horses and taken off across the Hudson River on a January night and plunged through the ice, horses, carriage, all, and not till the thaw weeks later did they find him, washed ashore below Storm King. They poured whiskey down her throat to stop the screams. And then the part I thrilled to hear. They buried her with him. She never said his name again. Her children's anyone's. She never spoke, but at night they'd hear her in her room, moaning as a dog moans at full moon. That was grief then, no words for it. Now I stare at the anemones, their reds and purples pulsing in a rhythm like the hearts, seeing the cascade of leather, wheel, blanket, horse, the wild wheeling eyes of the man powerless to stop, plunging deeper into water, the cold shock of it, the mute screams that carried straight to her heart and stayed there the rest of her life, opening at night like these creatures I imagine I can hear breathing underwater. The child whispers again. We move on to the next tank, red-bellied piranhas that hang like ornaments in the water, bright, harmless. But if the glass were to break, he'd driven the river for years. Sometimes she went with him, her dark hair streaming in the wind, wild with it like the horses' manes. The ice held them like the hand of God, she wrote once in her diary. Or someone who loved irony added that to what I'm telling you now, making it up as I go, by way of telling you all I keep being unable to say, how losing you would feel like losing the words to the story. I need some more water. Another one of my obsessions is the house that I grew up in, which was severely unfinished. And I am old, but I wasn't born in the 1800s. It had a dirt floor, no plumbing to speak of, one electrical outlet, no rooms, no anything. And I spent 13 of my crucial years there. The writer Flannery O'Connor said, all you need as a writer are the first 20 years of your life. After that, nothing really needs to happen. You have all your material. So 13 of those 20 years for me were spent in this house. And the poem is called Late Explanation to Old Lovers. It's not easy dragging a house on your back, but it's still unfinished, so where should I set it down? How should I stop the long haul? That's what one of them said to me once. I'm in it for the long haul. He had no idea I had a house on my back. He thought he'd given me shelter. That was enough. I tried to tell him. I'd say, this house, and he'd interrupt, not that again, thinking he could snap me out of it, out from under it. Who knew? By then, my father was dead. Shame isn't easily cremated. I could feel it there in the ashes, heavy, gritty, like the years of grime the house had acquired while I hauled it along. I left the long haul one, found another. This time, I kept the house secret, pretended I'd grown up in a house like everyone else's. Floors, windows, doors. But he kept feeling the air around me. Something's there, he said one night. Something I can't get at. I grabbed the storm door that should have protected the actual door, which lay on the dirt floor, back in the shadows like a man come undone, like my father. So you know what happened to that one, how fast his "this just isn't working" speeches came. The house shifted on its cinder blocks, but no wind was ever strong enough to carry it away. Still the case. When someone says, my skin, I think of the house I walk in, the trouble it takes to fit into a car, a theater, aisles in a grocery store. The hitch in my gait is the slope of the roof and the hole where stairs should have been. Some nights I fly in my dreams, the house a shadow so heavy I'm about to fall. But I don't fall, or if I do, I wake. And the house, being solid, oh, the lovers who tried and tried to get their arms around me, stays. I need another sip of water. I probably should have chosen poems that are shorter, but I did not. So here we go. One subject that has truly obsessed me is what happened to my mother during the last 8 years of her life. She was diagnosed with Parkinson's at first when she became ill, but really what it was, and it has similarities to Parkinson's, was Lewy body dementia. Lewy body dementia is the second most common form of dementia. It's similar to Alzheimer's in some ways, but not entirely. It's the dementia that Robin Williams was diagnosed with, which led him to suicide. So the only thing I need to mention before I read this poem is toward the end, there's mention of the mythological figure Danae, who was a beautiful daughter of a king who had been told that his grandson was going to kill him. So to prevent his daughter from getting pregnant, he locked her in prison. And Zeus, in his shape-shifting genius, wanted this beautiful woman, and so he descended on her in a shower of gold. To the young man who cried out, "What were you thinking?" when I backed into his car. I was thinking, no, oh no, not one more thing. I was thinking my mother, who sat rigid in the passenger seat, crying, "How terrible!" as if we had hit a child, not your front bumper, would drive me mad. And then there would be two of us mad, mother and daughter, and things would be easier. They said things would be easier once she went to the other side into complete, total madness. I was thinking how young you looked, how impossibly young, and trying to remember myself young, my body, my voice, almost another person. And I wanted to weep for all I had let come and go so casually, lovers, cities, flowers. And then I was thinking, you little shit, for the way you stood outside my window with your superior air, as if I were a stupid old woman with a stupid old woman beside her shouting, "What were you thinking?" As if I were incapable of thought, as I nearly was, exhausted as I'd become, tending my mother, whom I had just taken to the third doctor in so many days, and you shouting your rhetorical question, then asking to see my license, your license, slowly, as if I would not understand the word, and the lover who made me feel as if I never knew anything appeared then, stepped right into your body, saying, "What were you thinking?" After I had told him, sobbed to him, that I thought we would, And then my mother began to cry as if she had stepped into my body only years before, or was it after? And suddenly I saw the whole human drama writ plain, a phrase I felt I had never understood until then. An October afternoon in Berkeley, California, warm, warm, two vehicles stopped in heavy traffic on campus, a woman deciding to make way for a car trying to cross gaily, act of random kindness she thought might bring her luck, then immediately, right before impact, knew would be bad luck if it came, being so impure in its motive. And then the unraveling of the beautiful afternoon into anger and distress that would pass unnoticed by most of the world, would soon be forgotten by those witnessing the event and eventually those experiencing it, while the sun went on lowering itself toward the bay and ginkgo trees shook their gold leaves loose until a co-ed on the way home from class, unaware a car had backed into another car, unaware of traffic, stopped to watch the shower of ginkgo, thought of Zeus descending on the sleeping Danae in a shower of gold, and smiled over all her own lover would do in the bright, timeless stasis before traffic resumed. So now a short poem. I do write them. My writing practice is that I write every day. And I used to teach with a guy who taught art and who would tell his students that behind every good drawing, there are 100 bad drawings. And he would look at them and say, so let's get to work. And I feel that way with my own practice of poetry. I liken it to sports because I love basketball. So I think of, not to compare myself to them at all, but I think of Steph Curry or Caitlin Clark, and they can't just show up for the game. They have to practice. So I practice every day, and every once in a while, a poem just happens. And usually I don't have to revise anything. I think the revision is all the practice that I've done. Anyway, this poem just arrived and it happened as fast as I could type. Elegy for the Parents. While we slept, such heavy rain swept past. It shook the last roses loose. They lay smashed on the deck this morning, their petals scattered like big white tears. I shouldn't say a thing so sentimental, but there they were. And you, my father, so long dead, why should I not expect you to be everywhere, reminding me how little will be left? Vague ache in my own daughter's heart as she sweeps the steps after rain whose mercy is all in the coming again. And the last poem I'm going to read, excuse me, has to do with, I don't know if it's an obsession or just a kind of legacy I was left with after going to Catholic high school as what my father called a black-hearted Protestant. And the nuns would urge me, Dominican nuns still in habits, this is a long time ago, they would urge me to pray for the gift of faith. And I prayed, but I never received the gift. But I think in some ways the gift was that all of that, because I loved and longed for it, I love the pageantry. All of that has sort of worked its way into my psyche, and it often appears in poems, and it does in this one. And the other thing that's present in this one is the woods and dogwood in a ravine near the house where I lived. And I lived in Cornwall and Hudson, New York, by Round Top Mountain and Storm King Mountain. And the neighborhood spinster, whom we called Aunt Bess, although she was nobody's aunt, would take us on hikes on Saturdays. And we would have to go quietly through the woods because she would tell us the woods were a cathedral. And I loved that. And that also has stayed with me. So, none of us at prayer. The first morning the dogwood flowered, we slowed down to watch the petals guttering above the ravine floor. The trees were candelabra. This had been said many times before. The woods a cathedral, that too. But we were young, innocent of names already given. We knew picking dogwood was forbidden, so we dreamed of sneaking out while others slept, to break whatever branches we could reach and run with them like torches through the tunnel of oak and maple that by day was just the street we lived on. We would whirl and spin the white-tipped branches until the flames thinned, then wait while our senses calmed, the petals reignited. The first one I touched shocked me with its thickness. It's wet. The pale bracts swirled pink at their centers were the wounds of Christ, the nuns had told us, and if we were pure in prayer, our palms might open someday and bleed of their own accord as the dogwood bled while we dreamed our way through the tunnel lit by our stolen torches. Years passed, and none of us had dared to pick one branch, even one blossom, for fear we would be mutilating the persistent body of Christ. Though by now we were old enough to know the stigmata came from hysteria, probably sexual hysteria or unholy fervor. And we were old enough to sneer at descriptions of dogwood as candelabra, at dreams of weaving white torches through the night. If we sneaked out for anything, it was boys who waited like trees in the dark and pulled us into them wordlessly. So whoever broke the first one off that morning on the way to school slid the jagged sprig through the buttonhole of her blazer lapel, saying, "So let them arrest me." None of us could say with certainty now. Maybe none of it happened. Maybe none of us lay dreaming of the flames of dogwood dipping and arcing while we made our strange circling procession. But we are all marked by it. Look at my palms, the emptiness, the cathedral in ruins, and none of us at prayer. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Lynn, for sharing your meditative poems full of memory and humor and sadness and grief. What a special reading to have on Sylvia Plath's birthday. And thank you for sharing your obsessions and inspirations during this reading. I want to ask you to try to remember yourself young, as you stated in your poem to the young man, and ask you, when did you first start writing poetry? Was there a particular moment or experience that set you on this path?
I always wanted to be a writer from the time I can remember. I loved books, and there was nothing to do in that house but read. So, there was no TV, there was nothing. So we all read books. And in fifth grade, I had a wonderful teacher whose name was Mrs. Seipel, and she had us write poetry. And I wrote a poem, and I rhymed. It was about autumn. And I think the beginning went, two of the lines went, the golden leaves are falling past me. The golden leaves are falling fastly. And when I read my poem, Mrs. Seipel said, fastly is really not a word, but if you're a poet, you get to make up words. And I thought, wow, that's for me. So that really marks the start of it for me. But then I just kept reading and reading and wanting to be a
Wow, that's a really cool anecdote.
poet.
Like as a poet, you are in charge of language and you get to shape it in your poems and reshape it for audience perception. I think that's a really great way to describe being a poet. And how do you think your relationship to writing has changed throughout your life?
Oh, probably a long, complicated answer, Sophia. It never stopped that I wanted to be a writer. There was a period, a 19-year period, during my second marriage when I didn't write. I wrote one cycle of poems for my father on his birthday. And all my father said about them was, I never was much for poetry. He was a great reader, but he wasn't really keen on poetry. My mother was, though. And I think I probably became a poet because of my mother, who sang to my sister and me when we were babies from the get-go and made up songs as she went along. And herself was a poet, but she got rejected by Poetry Magazine when she was very young, I think 19. And she didn't have anybody to say to her, everybody gets rejected by poetry. Getting rejected is part of being a poet. So she just stopped. She just stopped writing, which is very sad.
Mm.
Anyway, I didn't write other than that cycle for my father for 19 years. And then when I moved to Berkeley, 1990, I started again. And then I had all that behind me, and I was older and I knew more. And um, you know, you I wish I could live for 50 more years, because I would really love to see what you are going to do. You're already so incredibly talented. You're not even 20, right? Are you 20 yet?
I turned 20 last month.
Well, happy birthday,
So,
belatedly. You
thank
have all
you.
the material, according to Flannery
Mhm.
O'Connor, you have all the material you need. But
I
I
was
would love
just
to
about
see
to
what's going to
say.
happen. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no, I was just about to say, yeah, I'm done. No more experience necessary.
Yeah, well, there we go. So I don't know. I mean, as I started publishing in the early 90s, and now I think I don't send out as often as I used to. And
Mhm.
I'm in Canada for the time being, and I'm trying to acquaint myself with journals here, but there's so many in the States that I still love and want to be in. So, and
Yeah.
I still feel so connected to California, to Berkeley. I do. I almost put as a background, there's a choice you can make with Zoom, at least, of the Golden Gate Bridge. And I thought, well, maybe I'll do that, but I didn't. So, okay.
I can really tell your love for California, especially in your poem that is a letter to the young man. Um, because you talk about Berkeley and the Golden Light with such care and tenderness. And it's really interesting what you said about rejection. One of my favorite mottos that I learned when I was quite young was fail, try again, fail better. And I really like that this quote kind of places an emphasis on failing, and that failure and being rejected is actually good because it can push you into new directions and redirect you towards something better. And even though failure and rejection really sucks and can make you feel really sad in the moment, it definitely helps give a fresh perspective to move forward.
It definitely does. And it stings less the more rejections you have. I used to have the wicker thing the wicker thing on top of a wine cask or something. And it filled with rejection slips. And I thought, why am I keeping these? But this is like visible punishment. Why are
Yeah.
you doing this? I threw them out. But yeah, no. And often when it happens, you look at the poems and you think, oh, well, no wonder. Or you get a poem accepted, and it was the poem in the pack you sent that you thought was your filler, the one that nobody would consider, and that's the poem they took. So it's just the entire thing is a crapshoot. You don't know, so you just have to keep writing. You keep writing.
Everything that I submit is usually online these days, so I feel like having a physical rejection letter is so much worse than just receiving an email. So kudos to you for dealing with that system for so long.
Yeah, and then pitching them that. Yeah.
And you mentioned in your reading that you have a practice of writing every day, and you just talked about how there's that period in your time where writing felt really hard. So, how do you keep up this sustained creative writing practice even when you feel off or writing feels difficult or distant? Do you have a specific writing ritual or routine that you follow?
I do have a routine. Everybody that knows me is, I think, annoyed by my routine and my dedication to it. During that time that I didn't write poems, I did write prose. I wanted to have a story in the New Yorker in the worst way. And I kept writing story after story after story. And it seems to be the case. I've also written 5 novels. It seems to be the case that I'm really a poet because none of those things have been published, but my poems have. So yeah, I think that I really, from the time I graduated from when I was at the University of Michigan, I studied with General Hall, and he was hugely influential because I really didn't know much about poetry until I took seminars with him. And that's when I started taking it really seriously and writing. But the daily practice of it probably didn't start until I moved to Berkeley. Another
Mm.
reason, to love California. Um, and I just, I had in Berkeley, I had what I called my cave. It was the bottom part of a house, and you had to go through a trap door in the kitchen to get to it. So it was like descending into, one of my friends would say, you've gone down into the well. So it was a great place to write. It was totally quiet. And I would go there every morning. And here I come into my writing room every morning. And the routine is I walk for an hour, I eat breakfast, I read French, and then I come write. And I don't talk to anybody in the morning. I don't like to talk. I think it
Wow.
interferes with the with the signals that are up there from dreams or whatever.
Yeah, the subconscious still remaining from sleep. That's really cool. And your writing well or writing cave sounds really magical, like it's just from a fairy tale.
It was, I mean, physically it wasn't that great, but it was in terms of the feeling of the room and the quiet and the ease with which I could go down into the well.
So you just talked about how you wrote novels, um, as well as your many poems and other genres, and even in the poems you read today, they showcased a wide variety of different and diverse forms, like a lyric poem, narrative poem, persona poem, epistolary, which writing a letter. And how do you typically decide what form or shape a poem is going to take? Is it while you're writing it or afterwards?
It's always while I'm writing it because I don't, you know, I don't write in a notebook and then go back. It's just the way I write. And sometimes I have the idea that I want to write a sonnet, so I just sit down and write a sonnet. Um, Sonnets are very easy for me to do, and they're very good, but they're easy for me to do. And I love playing with form. That that line I mentioned, that was the only one that survived of Ginevra da Benci. When I saw that, I ask your forgiveness, and I am a mountain tiger. I thought, oh my God, I have to reclaim her voice. So I wrote a sestina because you know, it seemed like that would be the right thing to do for an Italian poet. And I just love playing with form, and I play with form a lot, but usually they end up being practice, you know,
Mm.
poems. That sestina did end up being a poem, but a lot of them don't work. But you know, it's just fun. I have
Yeah.
fun. I really have fun doing it. So
Don't leave fun at the door when you're writing. Bring it with you.
absolutely not. Yeah,
A lot
absolutely.
a lot of your poems also have really funny lines of dialogue interwoven with the flowing lyrical descriptions. It's almost like I see the scene in my mind, and it's like a play, especially in your letter poem and in the story poem where the father is carrying a son and says anemones instead of anemones. So I see more genre and possibility in your poems as well. And I remember when we first met, you were guiding me through a performance of and reading of one of my poems. So I'm curious to learn, what role does performing or reading a poem out loud influence your initial first draft? Do you intend to write your poem to be voiced, or would you rather prefer it to remain on the page?
Both, I think. I don't usually read them aloud right after I've written them. And I don't think that's a good practice. I think I should because I think you hear more when you read it aloud. Definitely you do.
Mhm.
I don't know. I um I just go into this little world in the cave there in Berkeley or here. And when you were reading your poem, you didn't need any coaching for sure. Such a fabulous poem. I mean, it was so good. And um, people, let's just say what it was. The 16 Rivers Press had published an anthology called America, We Call Your Name. And then we put out a call, poets across the country, to pick one of the poems in the book and respond to it. And then we had a contest, which Sophia brilliantly won. And that's how we met. And I am so grateful for that contest and for
Me
you.
too.
So,
And I think
yeah.
it also stands as a testament to a cross-generational weaving of voices, especially through American poetry. it was really important to have that contest for me as a young poet and submit and talk in conversation with um, older poets. And even now, this is a great example of the inspiration and creativity that can come from conversation about poetry. And I'm just so grateful to be here with you.
Well, I am to be with you, and I would like to ask you what your practice is, because how do you do it? You're doing 5,000 things all the time. It's amazing. Do you sleep? I hope.
I sleep, I think, too much. Uh, but I write a lot of form-based poems too. I think I found that I also have my obsession specifically for the form of the ghazal, which is couplets that end with the same word over and over again. That's the form of poem. I wish I had more of a developed writing routine or habit, which is why I'm always so curious and asking other poets what their magic is. Truly, when inspiration strikes me, I just have to sit down and write and capture the moment. And sometimes it happens in a dream, and sometimes it happens when I'm just walking and enjoying my life, and a phrase just pops out at me. Like the other day, I learned about the word snuggery, which is basically um, like a place where birds roost. And I think that it's such an adorable word, and I have to figure out how to insert it in a poem somewhere. Um, and sharing that Sylvia Plath quote about putting not being able to put toothbrushes into poetry is really, really funny to me, and I want to figure out if I can write a toothbrush poem in honor of her and this day.
We should both do that.
Yes.
We should
And
write a toothbrush poem. Okay.
I also, funnily enough, find a lot of inspiration from art, just like you mentioned, your affinity for Ginevra de Benci. I really love Sofonisba Anguissola, who is one of the first early female painters of the Italian Renaissance. I'm sure you're familiar with her work, but I'm just obsessed with her paintings and her story as well. Do you have other inspirations besides um, Ginevra de Benci in art and stories and just other poets that you find really influential in your work?
I have written a lot of ekphrastic poems because whenever I go to a museum, I buy postcards since you can't afford, to buy paintings. And I have a basket this deep filled with postcards by my desk. And if usually when I sit down to write, a line comes in through my right ear. I don't know where it's coming
Mm.
from, but it comes in and I put it down and follow it. But a lot of the time, then that doesn't happen, or I put the line down and I think, oh, that one. I reach into the basket with the postcards and I just pull one out. And I have to, the rule is, I have many rules. I'm very obsessive. The rule is that I have to write about that. So, some days that works and some days it doesn't.
Yeah. I think paradoxically, rules and constraints actually free up possibilities in poetry.
They do. It's like everybody, the poet A.E. Stallings, if you're familiar with her work, she is genius. Line.
Wow.
She says, that when you're working in form like that, you discover things you didn't know you knew because your
Mm.
mind has to find it. Nobody out there is going to tell you, okay, you could put this in that line. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful form. And
Since
I
oh.
go
Oh
ahead.
no, you go ahead. Sorry. I
No,
thought you
I have to drink some water.
Okay.
So you go.
Yes. Um I also think drinking water is during your reading was really refreshing. Like we everyone you were reading a lot and everyone just needs to take a break sometimes. So I just wanted to emphasize the importance of reflection and also allowing yourself time to do the things that you need to do to take care of yourself. So
Thank you.
yeah, no need to
Yeah, but
feel awkward for drinking water.
yeah, it's a necessary component of being alive, right? I mean, you
Mhm.
do need water. Yeah.
I was wondering about your poem, "The Silence of Women," and how a lot of your imagery revolves around the domestic sphere and also just everyday tasks often associated with women, like steaming the broccoli or old bread crumbling. So, how do you think using those specific domestic images strengthens or maybe contrarily weakens the feminist message in the poem?
I don't know. It's like your grandmother's soup. You know, there's
Mhm.
something about that in your poem. You've used that more than once, I think, in your work. And there's something about being part of the community of women across culture, across time, that is comforting. It's comforting. And
Yeah.
it's like bringing a toothbrush into a poem, bringing steaming broccoli and soup. You know, we can do that. We know how to make soup, we know how to steam broccoli, and we know that all of that can go into a poem. And I don't think men would be that inclined to write about steaming broccoli. No, some but we do.
Mhm.
More water.
And I love how that poem ends with the stories rushing out like a breath, and then you just end it with this M dash. Like the possibilities are still flowing forth and forward, and that's what that energy is carrying us through the rest of your stories. I think it's really, really well done. And I just wanted to switch it to asking you about what do you think the role of truth telling or truth bending plays in poetry? A lot of your poems, especially in this reading, such as Hairpins, The Story to the Young Man, kind of play with narrative truth versus the truth you're telling as a poet. And um, even in Hairpins, you start the poem off with a quote from a Chinese poet, but playfully state, "Oh, it's loosely translated, so if I'm wrong, don't quote me on it." So, what do you think the role of a poet is in truth telling? Do you think that navigating the line between truth and an interesting story is important to be walked in your poetry, and how do you do that?
I'm going to quote the poet Robert Hass, from whom I took a workshop when I first arrived in Berkeley. And Robert Hass said that when you're a poet, there's a little bird sitting on your shoulder saying, tell the truth, tell the truth, tell the truth. And I think there are many ways to tell the truth, but as an example of that, the story, I mean, there are autobiographical elements in that, but
Mhm,
it's really a love poem. It's about
mhm,
wanting to express love in a way that will get to the person, you know, that is behind the poem. And I think it's important not to, certainly important not to lie, but you can, you know, everyone says the truth is stranger than fiction. So you're not really bound by, you're not bound as a poet by being absolutely too truthful to your own life. You have to be true to the emotions and to the ideas that you're feeling. It's probably a muddled answer. Better to say, tell the truth, tell the truth, tell the truth. in whatever way you can.
Mm-hmm. I also feel like, well, first I wanted to ask you about your poem, the story, and how you're portraying a lot of family history and walking kind of this autobiographical line. Um, but do you feel like when you're writing down family history or kind of creating this family mythology, are you ever worried about whether or not this is your story to tell?
Yes, and there are poems that I will never write because of that.
Mhm.
That I think would probably be like a good poem, but so what? You don't. I remember reading that someone asked Seamus Heaney why he didn't write more about his family.
Mm.
He said, they are just too close. They're too close.
Yeah.
Yet he wrote beautifully about his mother, and he did write poems about his family, but mostly, he didn't want to intrude on that private space. And I think that's something you have to honor when you're telling the truth. The truth is not
Yeah.
always your truth to tell, right? And that poem, the story, um, it is true that my grandfather ran a livery stable and drove horses on the Hudson River. Nothing else is true. He didn't plunge through the ice. I didn't have a grandmother named Anna. None of it is true. That and that reminds me of, the anemone thing, which was really
Yeah.
the kernel of the poem that started it. Toni Morrison said that when you're a writer, you have to pay attention to every moment because you have no way of knowing when something that you're noticing is going to come into your work. It might take a year, it might take 10 years. I mean, you have all this time ahead of you, Sophia. So just keep noticing.
I sometimes consider myself maybe a thief of language because, like I mentioned with the snuggery, like I just heard that word and now I just want to take it and put it into another poem, even if it's not necessarily about the moment that I learned what a snuggery is or about a snuggery. And I think that your entire poem, it's so brilliant and it hinges on that punning of anemone versus anemones, like what people say instead of the proper pronunciation, but then it opens up a whole new meaning for the word and for the poem. And I just think it's brilliant overall.
Well, the cool thing about snuggery is that, if you use snuggery in a poem, it's like you're making your own little roost, your own little nest, right? You're making a nest
Mhm.
for snuggery. That's great. I
Yeah.
will be happy to see that poem.
So we have to review our list: toothbrush poem and snuggery poem. I'll
Okay,
get back
you
to
do
you
the
with those.
snuggery. I think I'll just stick with the toothbrush.
Sounds good. Wow, Lynn, this session has just flown by. I have two more questions left for you. You cultivate such great practices for writing, and I just wanted to ask for the audience if you have any practices that you recommend for someone who's new to poetry and wants to start writing their own.
I would just say, have fun. Have fun. Try everything. Don't expect that you're going to get published right away. Sometimes that can be harmful. Just have fun doing it because it is a real joy. Play with words. It just is. So just have fun.
And for those who want to follow along with for more of your work, where can they find you? Are there any upcoming publications you'd like to share?
Um, I do have a website, so they can just, type in my name and it'll pop up. And, things are coming out here and there, but I can't at the moment list them. So I don't know where I have not been submitting as much, and I can't remember whether stuff already came out or it's coming out. Anyway, yeah, they can just look at the website. There are a lot of poems on the website. So.
Amazing. You can't get enough of Lynne Knight. Just check her out on the website. Well, thank you, Lynne, for joining us today for this fabulous conversation, your stupendous reading. I really, really thank you.
I am so grateful to you for everything. So thank you for inviting me. I loved being with you.
Amazing.